All right, so today we're going to be doing pretty much the same thing we were doing yesterday. We're going to continue analyzing the text. Therefore, our objectives are to apply knowledge of bias, logical reasoning, logical fallacies, and rhetorical appeals to an informational and argumentative text, and to utilize prior knowledge of annotating to provide in-depth analysis of the text. So, quick recap: what's a bias?
An opinion based off opinion on somebody based off of previous experience.
Okay, an opinion based off previous experiences, but it's not just against somebody, but like anything really, right? Do we all have biases? Yes. What about racism?
That's a bias.
Racism is a bias, but is all bias racist? No. Racism is biased with some hate thrown in. All right. Everybody has a bias. Is that a good or bad thing?
That can be a good thing.
It can be a good thing, right? As long as we acknowledge our biases, right? Okay. There's a spectrum of bias. What's that spectrum?
Left and right.
Left and right, right? So on the left we have liberals.
Oh, okay. Liberals.
And on the right we have conservatives. In the middle we have moderates. Beautiful. Okay. Let's see. So we need to acknowledge our biases, and then we need to also use logical reasoning. What is that? The way we think, right? There's two types. What types are they?
Deductive and inductive.
Deductive and inductive. So inductive starts with specific evidence and goes to a general conclusion or premise, right? I like the way you said that, conclusion, yes. Okay, so we're deductive. We start with a general conclusion and go find specific evidence. One of the main ways we use deductive reasoning is through inferencing. Basically, we come to a general conclusion and then we go find the hints that the author or whoever leaves, right? So the writer implies, the reader infers. Okay, logical reasoning also helps us establish arguments, but if our arguments has logical fallacies, it might be a what kind of argument?
False.
Weak.
Yeah.
A weak argument. What are some of the types of logical fallacies?
I read them all off yesterday.
What's the most popular one? Cherry picking, yes, all right, where we leave out information, and we see that all the time when we look at commercials and reviews, right? What is the most, I'd say, petty, childish one?
Ad hominem.
Ad hominem, why?
Because you just go after their argument.
You don't go after the argument, you go after
them personally.
it's a personal attack, right? And so, yeah. What if I was to say, I'm a great teacher because I'm great? What kind of argument was that? A circular argument, remember? So yeah. All right. So the more logical fallacies you have in an argument, what type of argument do you have? Like weaker argument, right? So you want to try to get rid of them. But in our arguments, we don't just want to make sure we're free of logical fallacies. We want to make sure that we hit some rhetorical appeals. What are those? Ethos, pathos, and logos. There are ways that we persuade people, right? So if I'm using ethos, I'm appealing to credibility. How do I demonstrate credibility?
Like your degree or school you went to.
Yeah, my awards, my experience. Also, maybe the way I talk, right? So if I was to be your English teacher and I came in here and all I used was slang and I didn't speak proper English, you'd kind of be a little leery of me, right? You're like, you're supposed to be teaching me English and you can't, right? So the way that they talk. So then we have pathos. What does that appeal to? Emotional, right? It's the easiest one to hit. How do we appeal to emotions? Strong language. What else?
Images
and
music
and sounds, right? Okay. And then finally we have logos. That's when you appeal to logic. Yes. Boys, phones away. Okay, yes. So if I am appealing to your logic, what am I using?
Facts,
Facts and what's the other one?
statistics.
Statistics, right? So we're gonna also cite credible sources, right? We can release, well, this is my opinion and it's backed by such and such organization, right, or so and so. Okay, perfect. So any questions about any of that? The only thing that is due tonight is the discussion board. Please make sure you do it. I know some of you guys were the only person in your discussion, and that's fine, okay? I was gonna go through and make comments on them yesterday, but I'm tired, so I didn't, because I had a PD. So yeah, so that's the only thing due, so that way you guys have the whole weekend free, you don't have to worry, okay? And the reason I do the recaps at the beginning is because the way that I phrase them, that's probably gonna be the way you'll see them on the test. So I'm trying to drill them into your head so it's just second nature, okay? Any questions? Okay, how about you guys, Tatiana and Nathaniel, you okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Great. All right, so then we're also gonna continue to analyze how change happens, why some social movements succeed while others don't. So what are some things that we know about social movements? Are they short-term?
No.
No, they're long-term, right? So, and sometimes they can span decades. So social reforms target social issues. What did we say social issues were?
Issues that affect society.
Yeah, issues that affect society. So social reform targets those issues and tries to kind of fix them or address them. But do they ever truly solve it?
No.
Most of the time, no, right? Okay. So yesterday we read just the first two paragraphs and we did come up with some information. And we're not going to laugh at the way Ms. Garcia annotates. So she pretty much was saying that people always seem to have an opinion. She doesn't seem to be taking a side yet and has a casual tone. She did point out that it does take decades to achieve. And then she starts using credibility with ethos because she works for Georgetown University, which is a well-known university, and pretty much studies reforms, right? So she identified a number of patterns and then she listed these patterns here, correct?
Mhm.
And so it'd probably be a good idea if right here, we kind of put, I don't know why it always starts off with the bottom. If we put the patterns here. So patterns are all right here. And it basically lets us also know what we're going to be talking about in the article. Now, she really hasn't taken a position, but is she trying to persuade us of anything?
To buy a book.
Yeah, she's trying to persuade us to buy her book, which is How Change Happens, Why Some Social Movements Succeed While Others Don't, right? Okay. Oh, and the one thing I forgot to talk to you guys about is this term, leaderful. Is that a real word?
I don't think so.
No, right? So also the fact that it's in quotation indicates that that's pulled straight from her. And so she made that up. So she's saying a social movement also needs to be leaderful. What do we think that means?
It has to have a lot of people who are willing to lead.
A lot of people that are willing to lead, yes. So let's go ahead and write that. So now we know for a movement to be successful, she believes there has to be a lot of leaders, right? Okay. Any questions so far, the stuff that we already reviewed? No? Okay. So Crutchfield argues that successful social change leaders invariably recognize the importance of advocating for a shift in social norms, not just policy reforms, and that they never prioritize one over the other. So there's actually a lot of information in that one sentence, right? What do we think she's saying?
That to be, well, not to be, but most leaders are willing to recognize that even if other people think it's wrong, they know it's right.
Okay, kind of. You're very close. So let's think about it this way. So it says that they need to advocate both for a shift in social norms and policy. So one of the most well-known that we would know is, so after the Civil War, slavery is abolished, right? And everybody's supposed to be equal, right? The law says you're not supposed to do this, but social norms, did they change? No, right? So what it's saying is you can't just have the policy change. You have to have the people change. Why would that be important? Does a law matter if nobody follows it? No, right? In reality, a law is just kind of in the books. It's there to help try to reinforce it, but if the people themselves do not change, right? So like I could slap a rule on the board, right? But if I never enforce it and nobody in here changes to it, it's just words on a board, right? So that's what she's saying. So how would you phrase that if you were to put a note next to it?
Which one?
That sentence. So a shift in social norms, not just policy reforms. So if you were to summarize that up real fast, what would you say?
Hold on. I guess you need to get people to change and not just the rules to change.
Okay. So actually you need both, right?
Oh, yeah, but
So a need for both people and laws to change, right? That pretty much sums that up, right? Okay. So also notice that we're kind of chunking it as we go. And so remember I told you guys you can chunk it however makes it easier for you. You can either do a whole paragraph or chunk it how it makes it easier. So some of these are really long sentences and there's a lot of information in it. So that makes sense that we're up here, we kind of read the whole paragraph and went back. Here, we're looking at it sentence by sentence because there's a lot of information. So chunk it however it works best for you. So to support that contention, she shares some key insights from successful change leaders. In the movement of marriage equality in the United States, for example, LGBT advocates used polling research to reframe the focus of the campaign's messaging from rights to love and commitment, which in turn led to the dissemination of now familiar slogans such as love is love, and eventually a change in marriage laws. So what did we just learn?
that slogans are an important part.
Well, not just slogans. So let's think about it. So they're saying to support this, the idea that we're not just targeting laws, we have to target the people, right? So when the LGBT advocates were originally fighting, they kept talking about LGBT rights, right? That has a more legal term. But then they went and polled actual people and found out that people were more concerned with love and commitment. So they shifted. So now we know two things. Not only do we need to target social norms and the people, but what does a successful movement need to be?
Relatable.
Relatable and aware, like adaptive, right? You have to be able to change to target the important aspects of your stuff, right? So they may not have been as successful if they had said, okay, well, everybody says the love and commitment aspect is more important, but we're going to stick to rights. Would that have worked? Probably not, right? They're not going to get as much support. But when you target something like love and commitment, now all of a sudden you've made it more relatable to the people. It's not so legal, okay? So what could we say about that sentence? What's a quick way we could kind of sum up that sentence?
Oh, I have it.
So should I just target the laws?
No.
No, you need to target the people.
Yeah.
But I also need to be what?
Relatable and adaptive.
Relatable and adaptive, okay? So target both the people and the laws. Be relatable and adaptive. Okay. Were there any words in that sentence that you guys did not know?
Which one?
In the last sentence that I just read. We're gonna move this over here. Dissemination. Led to the dissemination. So disseminate means to pass out, to spread. Right? So what I would do is, if I were you guys, whenever you have words that you don't know, you can circle them or highlight them or whatever. That way you remember. And then I would put a note. Right? So to spread. To disseminate information is to spread information. And remember, we can use arrows and stuff to make sure that we know what connects to what. Oh, look, that actually looks like an arrow. Okay. Anything else that was important in this? And does that support this idea?
Yeah.
So you notice how she's building, right? Here's my observation. Here's my support. The reason I want you to notice that is because when you guys write too, you need to do the same thing. Here's my observation, and then provide support. And it's specific, right? She didn't just say, well, I noticed this in all movements. She chose a specific one, okay? Any questions?
Someone send you a message.
Hmm?
Someone send you a message.
Oh. Yes, I am. I'm going to put everything in there. And I'm going to spread. So remember, after we're done with this today, I'm going to like disseminate it. I'm going to send it out to all of you guys, okay? So that you'll have it as a model. All right. To further illustrate how change happens, Crutchfield highlights a number of instances where a movement prevailed over a determined counter movement that strayed from one or more patterns. So what does that say? To further illustrate how change happens, Crutchfield highlights a number of instances where a movement prevailed over a determined counter movement that strayed from one or more patterns.
So she, brain fart. She wrote down like where something was going, like something was trying to succeed, but people were trying to stop it.
Yeah, so that's the counter movement, right? That means that, so remember we talked about adversaries? This would be an adversary, right? But this one actually, when it says counter movement, that means they don't believe in the same thing. They believe in the opposite. So they're the true adversary. They're not a frenemy, they're an adversary, right? So, and she's saying where instances where a movement prevailed over that, so they won over the counter movement because the counter movement strayed from the normal patterns. So she's saying, she's reinforcing the idea that there is a set pattern you should follow as a social reform to be successful, okay? So is there anything you would highlight in this sentence, or would you just leave it?
How movement prevailed over determined counter movements.
Okay. Why would you highlight that?
Well, because that's what the next couple paragraphs, I'm assuming, is going to be about.
Okay. We're going to ignore that Ms. Garcia did that. Okay. Where's my eraser? There we go. So we'll do that in yellow. So you also want to make sure that if you are highlighting, your highlighting has importance, right? So I'm using yellow for important information, and I'll use green for words I may not know, right? So that way it'll be easier to see. Are you raising your hand or you just?
I'm raising.
Okay.
Should we highlight patterns too?
You can highlight patterns too, yeah. And you can actually do it in different ways, right? So if you ever open one of Ms. Garcia's books, like her own personal books, you're gonna see all kinds of highlighting. You're gonna see a whole bunch of notes in the side. I have questions. Sometimes I have things like, well, what's coming? You know, so your annotations need to be able to be understood by you. I may not understand all your annotations, but as long as I see that you're doing it and you're trying to figure it out, make the annotations yours. Use them the way that you need to use them, right? Because you may pick up a book of mine and see that it has all these annotations, but some of the stuff may not make sense to you, right? But if I pick it up, I'm like, oh, well, this is what I was thinking. The problem arises when you think you're creating a pattern for yourself and then you forget said pattern, and somebody says, well, what does that mean? And you're like, well, I don't know, right? Because annotating is supposed to help you analyze the text and understand it. So you need to make sure that it fits your way of thinking. Okay, and so for those of you that maybe speak a different language as a first language, you can annotate in your first language if it's easier for you. Those of you that are artistic, right? My sister's super artistic. She likes to draw. That's the way she thinks. She thinks in pictures. So when you look at her annotations, a lot of them are pictures. Because in her mind, that's how she thinks, right? So make it fit you. Okay, would you put a summary here, or do you think that that one's good?
I think that kind of explains itself.
Okay, so does everybody agree? We're gonna leave it blank. Okay. So most telling perhaps is the success the National Rifle Association has had in defending and expanding the gun rights of gun owners in the United States through a relentless focus on grassroots organizing. Indeed, the guns rights movement's grassroots army is the reason why, despite the wave of angry anti-gun protests, heartbreaking vigils, and pleading calls for reform that erupt after each tragic mass shooting, gun violence prevention groups still largely lose ground. So this is actually something that you guys should know about, right? Because we see mass shootings very often. And every time there's a mass shooting, what happens?
Anti-gun.
Anti-gun people come out, right? They even poll. They'll put polls out in the public, and all the polls show that people want gun prevention and all this stuff. Like, you'll see it. It looks like they have overwhelming support. Do they ever get far?
No.
No. So she's saying that the National Rifle Association, or the NRA, always tends to win out, even though when there seems like there's a huge push against them. So what is she implying? What can you infer about the NRA? What are they doing?
I was going to say that they're taking, like, well, I guess they already are in their final stages, but what I was saying is, like, they're taking the slow route. Well, meanwhile, the Anti-Gun Association only starts up when they're needed, and they go for a full sprint, and then they kind of.
Okay, so slow and steady wins the race, right? But is she also maybe implying that they're sticking to the pattern?
Yeah, they're sticking to what works.
They stick to what works. They don't change it up, right? To where a lot of, when the mass shootings happen, we change up what we're trying to do or say. There's not like a consistent, this is what we want. If you ever pay attention, after every shooting, it's like, okay, well, we want to get rid of this gun, or we want to do this law. Like, it's always something different. So it's always shifting to where the NRA, what's their main mission?
Keep
You ain't taking my
Second
guns.
Amendment.
It's my constitutional right. You're not taking my guns. That has always been their message. That will continue to be their message until they run into the ground, right? Slow and steady. So is there anything that we would highlight or put on here for that one?
Relentless focus on grassroots.
Okay. So remember, what did grassroots mean?
Where it starts.
Where it starts. And it's more of like a local, small, right?
Yeah. So
They're not trying to get, because obviously they're not the majority, right? Polls show they are not the majority. The majority of people say, yes, we want more gun laws to prevent these things. Yet their small origins are fighting consistently over and over again. So what you could do is right here, like you said, is slow and steady, right? So they're consistent. And so I could say something like slow and steady wins the race, right? And now I'll know what that means, right? And what else is it saying?
It sticks to its where it started.
Yeah, it sticks to its roots, right? Is consistent and follows the pattern, right? Make sense?
Yes.
Is that making sense, guys, on Zoom? Yes, no, maybe so? Perfect. Okay, awesome. All right, so any other questions about that one? And then also realize that they specifically use a quote that highlights grassroots. Well, where else did grassroots come up? And what she's trying to argue for, right? So she found a quote that specifically uses the same terminology to reinforce her idea. Okay? Now, what about this? Like, let's think about rhetorical appeals. Look at the wording. What is this appealing to? Despite the waves of angry anti-gun protests, heartbreaking vigils, and pleading calls for reform that erupt after each tragic mass shooting.
It has very emotional words in it.
So what is that?
Pathos.
Pathos, right? Emotional words, because not only they're using the powerful words to draw images, because most of us have seen the news and social media, we know what this looks like, right? After Sandy Hook, we saw what it did, right? And as teenagers, what do you guys practice that would make this more real to you?
The drills.
The drills, right? So this isn't some far off idea. This is something that you guys in and of yourselves have to think about and deal with, right? So they're making that connection. So we can say that this is a rhetorical appeal. So what we could do, you could either highlight it, or sometimes what I'll just do, if there's a lot of stuff, I'll just kind of make a line on the side and then write what I thought right there. I don't know why it puts it all the way at the bottom. OneNote needs to get its life together. Okay, so we can say that that was pathos, right? And that's all I need. I don't have to make it super long. I don't have to make it super big. You know, I don't even have to necessarily describe it because I can just go and look. That it all right here is pathos. Over the years, NRA leaders have been laser focused in growing and emboldening their grassroots base through community events such as barbecues and town hall meetings. In contrast, gun safety advocates have been more oriented towards elite politics at the national level and in pushing a comprehensive gun control bill through Congress.
So the NRA is appealing to people because they're doing fun stuff to say about what they want.
Yeah. So the NRA is targeting people, while the anti-gun are just targeting the law. But it's not like the NRA is forgetting the law, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to get their laws, but here, let me give you some barbecue, let's hang out, right? They're making that connection with society, their communities, to where this one is like, we're not worried about all that. Our focus is the law. So even though public supports the anti-gun movement, there's no connection to where the NRA does have connection, right? So in reality, when it comes time to vote on things, who's more likely to show up?
The NRA members.
The NRA members, right? Because I need to support my organization, right? So would we put anything here? Would you put like a little summary or anything? Or would you just leave it?
I guess you could put a summary that like NRA appeals to what people like.
Okay.
Or
appeals to just the people, right?
Appeals to the people.
Appeals to the people. The other organization, right? The other only to the laws, right? So I'm gonna teach you a nice fancy word. It's an English term. It's a literary device. You see how they offer one example here and then a contrast here? We call that a juxtaposition. Okay, so people can be juxtaposed, right? So if you have like a super popular cheerleader person and then you have like a nerd on this one, they're juxtaposed because by putting them side by side, what gets highlighted?
The cheer.
No, what gets highlighted about them? The similarities or differences? The differences. So when you juxtapose two contrasting ideas, when you put them next to each other, it shows how different they are. Okay. So you'll hear it more often later. Are there any words we did not know in this one?
Emboldening. Does that just means like emphasizing?
Yeah, embolden means to emphasize, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but also look at some of the terms here too. Laser focus. So the NRA is trying to reinforce the idea that the NRA has one goal. That's all they want is what they want, right? So where they don't really say that over here. And when it talks about elite politics, how is that different than barbecues? Huh? Yeah. And the elite are like the top, right? Which most of us cannot reach or believe we can reach, right? When we think of elite, we think of something bigger, better than ourselves, even if it really isn't. So it's kind of unattainable. But is a barbecue attainable? Absolutely, right? I'm always down for Mexican barbecue, some fajitas, some tortillas, I'm happy. I can do that. But can I deal with politics? Probably not, right? I can say my politics, but am I going to be going to Capitol? No.
Especially if you just got to voting.
Yeah.
Like if you turned 18, it's like.
And what also does this reinforce? The idea that the NRA actually cares about the people and what they think. Do we always think the politicians care about what we think? No, right? So if all they're talking to is politicians, do I think that you truly represent me? No, right? So that's there's a lot in that. You see, it was just a small section, and yet there's a lot of information in that. The dichotomous results of the two approaches speak for themselves and serve as additional support for Crutchfield's contention that the single most important decision movement leaders can have to make is whether to let their grassroots fade to brown or to turn them gold.
Okay,
So is there any words in there that you guys don't know?
dichotomous?
Dichotomous?
Yeah,
Opposing.
opposing.
Mm-hmm. So that's opposing. Dichotomous is opposing. So we were using green, right, for words. So opposing or opposite. So sometimes you'll hear people say, well, that's a dichotomy. That means it's like opposites. Opposite. Okay. Let's not laugh at Miss Garcia's annotating. Okay, any other words in there?
No. Well, I think I know what contention is. It's like her not her purpose, but her goal, I guess. Or
Her premise.
premise.
Yeah, her premise, her general conclusion, right? So it's just a synonym for that. So the dichotomous results of the two approaches speak for themselves. So they serve as evidence in and of themselves and serve as additional support to her premise that you have to know about your grassroots, right? You have to stick to the pattern. That the single most important decision, so grassroots indicates the people. So what's the most important thing of a movement? What can I infer?
That the people are the most important.
The people are the most important. Fade to brown or turn them to gold. So why would we say fade to brown? What?
Because eventually they die off.
They die. So what kind of metaphor is this? Well, what is she hinting at right here? Fade to brown. What happens to grass?
It dies eventually.
When it turns brown, it's dead, right? Especially if the roots themselves die. So you guys don't own homes or rent or whatever, but it's really hard to bring something that's dead back to life, right? Miss Garcia will kill any plant that she touches, just so you know. And so the minute it turns brown, I'm like, it's gone, right? I can't bring it back. So that's what it's saying. When you let the people, the support of the people die out, your social reform's gonna plummet, right? So turn them to gold though. Well, gold indicates like happiness, right? We think of like prosper, wealthy, strong, right? Is gold easy to just, no, right? So This is more lasting, right? And also think of the value of gold. As the value, have we ever said gold's not important? No, right? I mean, since they found gold, gold is important, right? Actually, gold is more stable than any monetary item you can have, right?
It stays the same.
So it's stable, it's long lasting. So if I wanted to just summarize that, because it's also at the end, so that indicates that that's the conclusion of her argument for that paragraph, right? So her argument has been that you have to be slow and steady and have your base. And this is her conclusion to that. What would I summarize that as? Any ideas? It doesn't have to be complex, it can be super simple.
Focus on the people, because if the people go, then so does your
Okay.
curriculum.
So you can even just put focus on the people, right? And she says that's the most important. So she had 6, right? 6 different patterns, but she's telling you that the people are the most important, okay? So you could put most important so that you remember that, right? And if I wanted to say, okay, well, how do I support that? Then I could go in here and just kind of highlight that, right? There's my support. So if I was to write a paper arguing that Crutchfield believes that people are the most important aspect, I could use this as a quote. I believe that Crutchfield is arguing that people are the most important aspect of a social reform because she states, blah, blah, blah. You see how that works? So that's also what you're trying to do when you're annotating. You're trying to find tidbits that if I have to write a paper, and always assume that you're going to have to write a paper at some point, right? Or I'm going to have to argue this at some point. I'm going to have to do a discussion post at some point, and I'm going to have evidence. Boom. Now I know, oh, look, I highlighted that this is it supports it, and I just pull it. Now I don't have to reread the entire text to look for it, right? Work smarter, not harder. So are there any questions about that? Okay, so I'm gonna finish the rest of it for you guys. And like I said, send it out to you just so you can see it. But are you guys getting the hang of it?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and the rest of the time will be independent study time. But I just wanted to make sure that you guys had a good understanding of how to do this, because next week on Monday, I'm gonna assign you to go get one of the texts that I've chosen and annotate it and analyze it, okay? Any questions? No? Cool. How about you, Tatiana and Nathaniel? Or did Tatiana leave? No, she's there. You guys good? Perfect. All right. So if you guys don't have anything else, you guys are free to go enjoy your weekend, relax. I'd probably take a nap if I was y'all. Bye.